What happens when experienced truckers cross the New Mexico desert and encounter things that defy every law of nature they know? When the roads themselves seem to shift, when time bends, and when something ancient watches from the darkness. And if you love terrifying true stories, hit like and subscribe so you won't miss the chilling tales on this channel. Now, let's dive in. Marcus Brennan had been driving commercial trucks for 23 years when he took what should have been a routine nighttime haul from Albuquerque to Las Cruces in August of 2022. He'd driven Highway 285 through the Jornada del Muerto, the journey of the dead man, more times than he could count. The 90-mile stretch of desolate desert basin between Socorro and Las Cruces was notorious for its emptiness, its harsh terrain, and its history of death stretching back to the Spanish conquistadors. But Marcus knew the road. He knew every mile marker, every curve, every rest stop. That night he pulled out of the Flying J truck stop in Socorro at 11:45 p.m. with a full load of construction equipment bound for a site just outside Las Cruces. The weather was clear, the stars brilliant in the unpolluted desert sky. His GPS showed the standard route, straight south on Highway 285, about 90 minutes of driving through absolute nothingness. He'd done this run so many times he could practically do it with his eyes closed. The first hour was uneventful. Marcus listened to talk radio, sipped from his thermos of coffee, and watched the empty highway unroll before his headlights. The Jornada del Muerto lived up to its name. Nothing but scrub brush and alkaline flats stretching to the dark silhouettes of the San Andres Mountains to the east, and the Fra Cristobal Range to the west. No other vehicles, no lights, just the white lines of the highway and the vast desert darkness. At 12:53 a.m., he passed mile marker 168. He remembered looking at the marker clearly, noting that he was making good time. Las Cruces was about 45 miles ahead. Then his GPS flickered. Marcus glanced at the screen mounted on his dashboard. The blue line representing his route wavered, then disappeared entirely. The screen showed only a gray void with his truck icon floating in the center. "Reception's always spotty out here," he muttered, giving the unit a tap. The screen remained blank except for 3 words that appeared in the center. Recalculating route. He wasn't concerned. GPS failed all the time in the Jornada del Muerto. The cellular towers were few and far between, and the mountains played havoc with signals. He knew the road. He'd just keep driving south until the signal returned. But 5 minutes later, he saw something impossible. An exit ramp appeared on his right, illuminated by a single sodium vapor light that cast everything in a sickly orange glow. Marcus slowed instinctively, confusion flooding through him. There were no exits along this stretch of 285. None. The highway was a straight shot through the desert with nowhere to turn off except the occasional dirt road used by ranchers or military personnel from White Sands Missile Range. Yet there it was, a paved exit ramp with a green highway sign that read Scenic Route 9A, Engel, Services. Marcus had never heard of Route 9A. And Engel, that was a ghost town with maybe 3 people living in it. Nowhere near this part of the highway. There were certainly no services. His hands tightened on the steering wheel as he passed the exit, watching it recede in his mirrors. The sodium light flickered and went dark. When he looked back at the road ahead, his breath caught in his throat. The highway was wrong. He couldn't explain how he knew, but the road in front of him was not Highway 285. The pavement looked newer, smoother. The white lines were brighter, almost luminescent in his headlights. And the road itself was curving, gently at first, then more sharply when it should have been running straight as an arrow through the desert basin. Marcus grabbed his CB radio. "Breaker, breaker. This is Black Horse Express. Anybody got their ears on?" Static answered him. He tried again. Any trucks on 285 south of Socorro? This is Black Horse. Come back? Nothing but the empty hiss of dead air. He checked his phone. No signal. The GPS still showed that gray void. He looked at his dash clock. 1:18 a.m. Somehow he'd lost 20 minutes. The last time he'd checked had been 12:53. The road continued to curve, taking him east when he should have been heading south. The mountains that should have been on his distant right were now directly ahead of him, growing larger. He passed another sign. Scenic Route 9A, Corona, 23 miles. Corona was a tiny town more than 60 miles east of Highway 285. It was impossible for him to have traveled that far in 20 minutes. It was impossible for this road to exist at all. Marcus made a decision. He would turn around, retrace his route back to that exit, and get back on the main highway. He slowed, looking for a place wide enough to safely turn his 40-foot tractor trailer. But as he scanned the roadside, he realized there was nowhere to turn. The pavement ended abruptly at the white line on both sides, dropping off into what looked like total darkness. Not the normal darkness of the desert, but an absolute black void, as if the road was suspended over nothingness. His heart began to race. He pressed the accelerator, deciding to keep moving until he found a turnaround. The road climbed now, switchbacking up into mountains that he knew weren't supposed to be here. The curves grew tighter. His trailer swung wide on each turn, and he had to slow to a crawl to navigate them safely. Then he saw the lights. Far ahead at the crest of the mountain road, a cluster of lights glowed warmly, the orange and white lights of a town. Relief flooded through Marcus. A town meant people, phones, answers. He could figure out where he was and how to get back to his route. As he climbed toward the lights, he began to make out details. Buildings lined what looked like a main street. Old-fashioned streetlights, the kind with actual flame like gas lamps, cast a flickering glow. Vehicles were parked along the street, but something about them looked off. He squinted through his windshield, trying to understand what he was seeing. The vehicles were old, not classic cars maintained by collectors, but working vehicles from another era. He saw what looked like a late 1940s pickup truck, a sedan that could have been from the 50s, a delivery van with rounded fenders and running boards. Marcus slowed as he entered the town. The buildings were wrong too. They looked period appropriate for the vehicles: wood frame construction, false fronts, hand-painted signs advertising goods and services in quaint old-fashioned lettering. General store, fuel and repairs, Corona Hotel. He was in Corona, but it was Corona from 70 years ago. People walked the sidewalks. He saw a woman in a long dress and hat pushing an old-fashioned baby carriage. A man in work clothes and a flat cap stood outside what looked like a barber shop, smoking a cigarette. Children ran past, wearing clothes that looked like something from a history book. None of them looked at him. None of them seemed to notice the massive modern semi-truck rumbling down their main street. Marcus felt ice spread through his veins. He pressed the accelerator, moving faster through the town. The buildings blurred past. The church with its white steeple, the schoolhouse, the post office. The people continued their activities, frozen in their period piece lives, oblivious to his presence. Then he was through the town and descending the other side of the mountain. The road straightened, and the pavement began to look familiar again. His GPS flickered to life, showing him back on Highway 285, south of mile marker 168. He was exactly where he'd been before the exit appeared. Marcus pulled over on the shoulder and killed the engine with shaking hands. His clock read 1:19 a.m. 1 minute had passed since he'd last looked at it, though he'd spent what felt like 45 minutes on that other road, in that impossible town. He sat in the silence of his cab, his heart pounding. Then he noticed something on his windshield. Caught under his wiper blade was a piece of paper. He leaned out his window and grabbed it. It was old, yellowed with age, and printed in that old-fashioned typeface. An advertisement for the Corona Hotel, offering rooms for $2 a night. At the bottom, in handwritten pencil, were 3 words: "Turn back now." Marcus stuffed the paper in his glove box and started his engine. He drove straight to Las Cruces without stopping, delivered his load, and immediately drove back north, taking Interstate 25 instead of Highway 285. He never drove through the Jornada del Muerto at night again. 3 weeks later, curiosity got the better of him. He researched scenic Route 9A and found nothing. No highway with that designation existed in New Mexico, and none ever had. He researched the town of Corona and discovered that in the 1940s and 50s it had been a thriving community of several hundred people. But a series of droughts, economic decline, and population loss had reduced it to a near ghost town by the 1980s. He also discovered that several people had disappeared along that stretch of Highway 285 over the decades. Travelers who were last seen heading south through the Jornada, who simply never arrived at their destinations. Their vehicles were never found. Marcus still has that hotel advertisement in his glove box. Sometimes on clear desert nights when he's hauling loads through other parts of New Mexico, he takes it out and looks at it. The paper has begun to crumble, the ink to fade, as if it's aging in real time, catching up to its actual years. He wonders if he was meant to disappear that night, if something in the desert wanted to add him to the list of the vanished. He wonders if that handwritten warning, "Turn back now," came from someone who hadn't heeded the advice, and he wonders what would have happened if he'd stopped at the Corona Hotel and tried to rent one of those $2 rooms. Jennifer Hartwell learned to drive a truck from her father, who'd spent 40 years on the road before retiring to a small ranch outside Roswell. When she took over his regional routes in the spring of 2023, she inherited his logbook, his contacts, and his warnings. "Never pick up hitchhikers on Route 60, he'd told her. "Never stop at the abandoned rest stop near Clonch. And if you ever see a military convoy on Highway 380 near the Trinity site after midnight, you keep your eyes on the road and you don't look back." Jennifer had laughed it off as her father's superstitions. He'd always told strange stories about his years on the road: ghost lights, mysterious figures, unexplained mechanical failures in certain locations. She loved him, but she was a practical woman. She believed in maintenance schedules, GPS navigation, and the concrete reality of asphalt and diesel fuel. Her father's warnings came back to her on a cold November night as she hauled a load of agricultural equipment from Roswell to Socorro. She'd left the Roswell depot at 10 p.m. planning to reach Socorro by 3 in the morning. The route took her west on Highway Tiomont 380, skirting the northern edge of the White Sands Missile Range and passing within 20 miles of the Trinity site, ground zero of the world's first atomic bomb test in July of 1945. The highway was empty, as it usually was at night. This was harsh country, sparsely populated, with vast stretches of nothing between tiny towns, the kind of place where you could drive for an hour without seeing another vehicle. Jennifer kept her speed steady at 65, listening to a podcast about true crime, her headlights cutting through the darkness. At 11:43 p.m., she crested a low rise and saw them. Vehicles, a long line of them traveling in the same direction she was, about a mile ahead. Military vehicles, from what she could tell, the distinctive shapes of deuce-and-a-half trucks, canvas covers over their cargo beds moving in formation. A convoy. Her first thought was that it must be a transport from Holloman Air Force Base or White Sands. Military convoys were common enough in this part of New Mexico, though usually not at this time of night. She eased off the accelerator slightly, not wanting to overtake them too quickly. Military drivers could be unpredictable, and the last thing she needed was to spook a convoy and end up with a security incident. But as she drew closer, she noticed something strange. The vehicles had no lights. No taillights, no marker lights, nothing. They were just dark shapes moving through the night, visible only because they blocked out the stars and the faint ambient light from the sky. Jennifer's practical mind offered an explanation. Maybe they were running a training exercise, practicing blackout conditions. But a nagging feeling in her gut told her something was wrong. She closed to within a quarter mile and could see the convoy more clearly. 7 vehicles, all moving at exactly the same speed, maintaining perfect intervals. Old vehicles, from the shapes, she guessed 1940s era, deuce and a halves with wooden side rails and canvas covers. The kind of trucks that belonged in a World War II movie. Her podcast fell silent. She glanced at her phone and saw that she'd lost signal, which wasn't unusual out here. But when she looked back at the road, the convoy had vanished. Jennifer blinked, her hands tightening on the wheel. The highway ahead was empty. Completely empty. No vehicles, no lights, nothing. She'd been looking away for maybe 2 seconds and they'd just disappeared. She scanned the roadside, thinking maybe they'd turned off, but there were no side roads, no turnoffs. Just the straight stretch of Highway 380 running through open desert. Her heart began to hammer in her chest. She reached for her CB radio, then stopped. Who would she call? What would she say? 5 minutes later, she saw them again. They appeared suddenly in her headlights, much closer than before, maybe 100 yards ahead. The same 7 vehicles running dark, moving in perfect formation. But now she could see more details that made her blood run cold. The trucks had white stars painted on their doors and hoods, the U.S. Army markings from the 1940s. The canvas covers were torn and weathered, flapping in a wind she couldn't feel. And through the gaps in the canvas, she caught glimpses of shapes in the cargo beds. Soldiers. Dozens of them sitting in rows on the bench seats, all facing forward. All perfectly still. Jennifer's breath came in short gasps. Every instinct screamed at her to slow down, to fall back, to put distance between herself and whatever this was. But her truck seemed to have other ideas. Her speed was increasing even though her foot hadn't moved on the accelerator. The speedometer climbed from 65 to 70 to 75. The convoy grew larger in her windshield. She tried to brake, but the pedal felt spongy, useless. The air brakes hissed but didn't engage. She was going to overtake the convoy whether she wanted to or not. As she pulled alongside the last vehicle, she made the mistake of looking. The soldiers in the back were facing her now, though she hadn't seen them turn. Their faces were gray, their eyes dark hollows. They wore uniforms from another era, and their expressions were frozen in something between surprise and terror. One of them was missing half his skull. Another had burns covering his face and arms. A third had no face at all, just a smooth expanse of scar tissue where features should have been. They were the dead. The burned, the victims of the Trinity test. Jennifer screamed and jerked the wheel to the left, pulling into the oncoming lane to pass faster. Her truck surged forward and she flew past the convoy vehicles one by one. Each cargo bed held more of the dead soldiers, all turning to watch her pass, all with those hollow eyes and ruined faces. She pulled ahead of the lead vehicle and swerved back into the right lane, her whole body shaking. In her side mirror, she watched the convoy behind her. But something was different. The vehicles were slowing, falling back, fading like ghosts into the darkness. Within seconds, they were gone. Her brakes worked now. Her speed fell back to a normal 65. Her phone signal returned and her podcast resumed mid-sentence. It was as if nothing had happened. But Jennifer knew what she'd seen. And when she reached Socorro 3 hours later, she sat in the parking lot of the Flying J truck stop and researched on her phone with trembling fingers. She found the history of the Trinity test, of course, the successful detonation of the world's first atomic bomb. But she also found the stories that weren't as well known. The security personnel and military support staff who'd been stationed near the site in the months before the test. The trucks that had hauled equipment and materials across the desert. And the convoy of 7 trucks that had disappeared in June of 1945, 1 month before the Trinity test. The official story was that the convoy had gotten lost in a sandstorm and driven into a ravine. All 23 soldiers aboard were killed. But local researchers and historians had documented something else. Witnesses who reported seeing strange lights in the sky that night, who heard explosions that weren't from any storm. The government had closed the investigation quickly, classified the details, and buried the story. Jennifer never drove Highway 380 at night again. She rerouted all her runs to avoid it, even if it added hours to her trips. She tried to tell other drivers what she'd seen, but most dismissed it as fatigue or imagination. A few listened with knowing looks and shared their own encounters. The phantom convoy had been seen by others over the years, always near the Trinity site, always after midnight, always running dark with its cargo of the dead. Her father called her 2 weeks later. "You saw them, didn't you?" he said. "The convoy." "How did you know?" Jennifer asked. "Because I saw them too. 30 years ago, same stretch of road. And my father saw them before me back in the 60s. He paused. "They're looking for something, Jenny. Or maybe they're trying to warn us. Either way, you did the right thing by staying away." "Who were they, Dad?" "Boys who died for their country before they even knew there was a war on," he said quietly. "Boys who hauled the components for the world's most terrible weapon across the desert and got caught by something we'll never understand. They're still out there, still driving their route, still trying to deliver their cargo." Jennifer drives past the turnoff to Highway 380 several times a month now, on her way to other routes. Sometimes, late at night, she sees a faint glow on the horizon in the direction of the Trinity site. She never investigates. She knows better. And every time she passes, she whispers a prayer for the convoy of the dead, still driving through the desert darkness, still trying to find their way home. Thomas Rivera had been hauling loads across the Southwest for 15 years, and he'd never believed in anything he couldn't see, touch, or explain. Ghosts, UFOs, cryptids, all of it was nonsense as far as he was concerned. The desert played tricks on tired eyes and stressed minds, that was all. There was always a rational explanation. That confidence lasted until March of 2024, when he took a nighttime run from Albuquerque to Deming with a trailer full of electronics. The route was simple: south on Interstate 25 to Las Cruces, then west on Interstate 10. 6 hours of easy driving on major highways. He'd done it 100 times. The trouble started when he decided to take a shortcut. Thomas was running late after a delay at the loading dock. If he stuck to the interstate route, he'd miss his delivery window and face penalties from the shipping company. But he knew a faster way: Highway 60 west from Socorro through the plains of San Agustin, then south on Highway 12 to Interstate 10. It would save him 45 minutes and get him to Deming right on schedule. The only problem was that it meant driving through the most isolated part of New Mexico, past the Very Large Array Radio Telescope facility, through country so empty that cell phone service was non-existent, and the closest help might be 50 miles away. But Thomas had driven it before during daylight. How different could it be at night? He pulled off Interstate 25 at Socorro just after 11 p.m. and headed west on Highway 60. The road was good, well-maintained, cutting through high desert scrubland and scattered ranches. For the first 30 minutes, everything was normal. Then he entered the plains of San Agustin. The plains were a vast expanse of absolutely flat desert, a dried, prehistoric lake bed that stretched for miles in every direction. It was the perfect location for the VLA, 27 massive radio telescope dishes arranged in a Y pattern, each one 82 feet in diameter, listening to the faint whispers of the universe. Thomas had seen them during the day, gleaming white against the desert and mountains. At night, they were invisible except for their small red warning lights. He was about 10 miles past the VLA visitor center when his radio went crazy. Thomas had the truck's AM radio tuned to a station out of Albuquerque playing country music to keep him awake. The music cut out suddenly, replaced by a high-pitched squeal that made him wince and reach for the volume knob. But before he could turn it down, the squeal morphed into something else. A voice. Multiple voices, actually, talking over each other in what sounded like different languages. He caught fragments. English, Spanish, something that might have been Russian. The voices were urgent, almost panicked, speaking rapidly about things he couldn't quite parse. Coordinates, numbers, something about signal degradation and point of origin. Then clear as day through the chaos of voices, he heard, "Trucking unit on Highway 60, do you copy? This is Array Command. Please respond." Thomas grabbed his CB mic. "This is a Black Iron hauling west on 60. Who is this?" "Array Command, driver. We're tracking an anomalous signal intersecting your position. Please confirm your GPS coordinates and current heading." Thomas glanced at his GPS. "I'm at, looks like mile marker 79 heading westbound. What's this about?" Static answered him. The voices on his AM radio swelled to a cacophony, then cut out completely. Both the AM radio and the CB went dead, showing power but emitting nothing but silence. His truck's headlights flickered. Thomas felt the hair on the back of his neck stand up. He checked his mirrors. Nothing but empty highway behind him. The road ahead was straight and clear. But something felt wrong. The air itself seemed to be vibrating, humming at a frequency he could feel in his bones but couldn't quite hear. Then he saw the light. It appeared to his right, out in the desert, maybe half a mile away. A brilliant blue-white light, so bright it hurt to look at directly, hovering about 20 feet above the ground. It wasn't moving, just hanging there, pulsing slowly like a heartbeat. The light it cast turned the desert landscape into sharp-edged shadows and lunar brightness. Thomas slowed instinctively, his practical mind trying to find an explanation. A helicopter, but he heard no rotor noise. A flare, but it wasn't falling. Some kind of military test from White Sands? But that was 80 miles away, and this light was close, very close. The blue-white light began to move. It traveled parallel to the highway, keeping pace with his truck. Thomas accelerated. The light accelerated. He slowed. It slowed. It was tracking him. His AM radio crackled to life again. This time there was only one voice, speaking in clear English with no emotion whatsoever. "Subject vehicle is attempting to flee. Maintain lock. Prepare for intercept." "What the hell?" Thomas grabbed his CB mic. "Who is this? This isn't funny." The voice continued as if he hadn't spoken. "Distance to subject 400 meters. Signal strength at 87% and rising. Confirming biological signatures. 1 biological signature detected. Human. Male. Elevated stress indicators." Thomas's heart was pounding now. They were talking about him. Whatever was in that light was analyzing him, measuring him, discussing him like he was a laboratory specimen. He floored the accelerator. His truck surged forward, engine roaring, but the light kept pace effortlessly. If anything, it was getting closer. The blue-white glow was so bright now that it illuminated the inside of his cab, casting everything in that unnatural light. The voice on the radio became more insistent. "Subject is displaying flight response. This is consistent with previous observations. Recommend proceeding to final phase. Final phase? Thomas shouted at the radio. Final phase of what? His headlights went out. All of them, the main beams, the running lights, even the dash lights. His truck's engine kept running, but he was driving blind through the desert darkness at 70 miles per hour with nothing but that terrible blue-white glow to show him the road. He hit the brakes and his truck shuddered to a stop in the middle of Highway 60. The light was directly beside him now, hovering just off the road. In its glow, he could see details he wished he couldn't see. The light wasn't a solid thing. It was filled with moving shapes, geometric patterns that hurt his eyes and didn't seem to follow normal rules of perspective. And at its center, barely visible through the brilliance, was something that looked like a structure. Metallic, angular, impossible. The voice spoke again. Subject has ceased locomotion, initiating direct contact. The passenger door of his truck opened. Thomas hadn't touched the controls. The door just swung open on its own, and the blue-white light poured in so bright he had to shield his eyes. Something was standing in the doorway. A silhouette, humanoid but wrong in proportions, too tall and too thin, with limbs that seemed to have too many joints. It spoke, and the voice was the same one from his radio. Please do not be alarmed. You are not in danger. We require information. Every survival instinct, Thomas had screamed at him to run, but he was frozen, his hands locked on the steering wheel. What? What are you? We are observers. We monitor communications. You intersected our analysis pattern. This is unfortunate, but perhaps useful. The figure tilted its head in a gesture that was almost human. You have seen us. You will remember. Tell us. Why do humans fear what they cannot understand? Thomas found his voice. Because things we don't understand can kill us. The figure seemed to consider this. An accurate assessment. We could kill you very easily, but we choose not to. Does this reduce your fear? No. Interesting. The figure raised what might have been a hand. Thomas's radio squealed and the voice came from it again. Observation complete. Releasing subject. Implementing standard memory displacement protocol. The light went out. Just like that. One moment it was bright enough to blind, the next it was gone, and Thomas was sitting in his truck in total darkness on a deserted highway. His engine was still running. His headlights flickered back to life. The passenger door was closed, though he hadn't seen it close. He was alone. His clock read 3:18 a.m. The last time he'd looked, it had been 11:45 p.m. Nearly 4 hours were gone, though his experience with the light had seemed to last only 15 minutes. Thomas grabbed his CB mic with shaking hands. Breaker, breaker, this is Black Iron. I need help. Anybody out there? A voice answered immediately, a truck driver heading east on Highway 60. Roger that, Black Iron. What's your 20? Thomas looked at his GPS. I'm at mile marker 115. 115, brother. That's 20 miles past the VLA. You lost? Thomas looked at his odometer. He'd traveled 36 miles in the missing 4 hours. He should have covered more than 200 miles in that time at highway speeds. Where had he been? What had happened during those lost hours? He delivered his load to Deming, though he had no memory of the final hour of the drive. The shipping company noted that he was 4 hours late, but they couldn't explain why his truck's GPS showed him stationary near mile marker 79 for most of that time before suddenly jumping to mile marker 115. Thomas tried to report the incident, but he couldn't decide who to call. The police? The Air Force? The VLA facility itself? In the end, he told no one, afraid of being labeled crazy or losing his commercial license for reporting hallucinations. But he started researching. He discovered that Highway 60 near the VLA was a hotspot for unexplained lights, strange radio signals, and time anomalies. The facility itself occasionally picked up signals that defied explanation. Radio bursts from empty sections of sky, transmissions that seemed to carry data but in no recognizable format. And he found other truckers with similar stories. Encounters with lights that tracked their vehicles. Missing time. Voices on the radio asking impossible questions. All of them near the VLA. All of them at night, all of them left with gaps in their memory, and the unshakable feeling that something had studied them like insects under a magnifying glass. Thomas still drives, but he refuses any runs that take him through the plains of San Agustin after dark. He keeps his AM radio off when he drives anywhere in central New Mexico. And sometimes, late at night, he'll pull over at a rest stop and scan the sky, looking for that blue-white light. He doesn't want to see it again, but part of him wonders what happened during those missing hours, what the final phase involved, what those observers did to him while his memory was displaced. And he wonders if they're still watching, still listening, still waiting for the next truck to intersect their analysis pattern on that lonely desert highway. Rachel Kim had learned early in her trucking career that you don't ask questions about sealed cargo. If the manifest says electronics, or industrial equipment, or medical supplies, that's what it is. And you haul it from point A to point B without worrying about the details. The shipping companies didn't like curious drivers, and Rachel liked getting paid. So when she picked up a sealed container from a warehouse on the outskirts of Albuquerque in July of 2023, she didn't ask why the pickup was scheduled for 3 a.m. She didn't ask why the warehouse had no company name on the building, just a street address. And she didn't ask why the 4 men who loaded the container onto her trailer wore no uniforms or identification badges. The manifest listed the cargo as laboratory equipment weighing 3,200 pounds, destination a research facility near Alamogordo. The route would take her south through the Jornada del Muerto on Highway 285, then east on Highway 70 toward White Sands and Alamogordo. 5 hours of driving, deliver by 9 a.m., collect her payment and move on to the next job. The men finished loading at 3:35 a.m. One of them, a lean guy in his 50s with salt and pepper hair and hard eyes, approached her cab as she was checking the container's lock. "You got a cell phone?" he asked. Rachel nodded. "Yeah, of course. Turn it off. Keep it off until you make the delivery." "Why would I?" "Because we're paying you 3 times your normal rate for this run, and one of the conditions is no electronic communication until delivery. You got a problem with that?" Rachel thought about her bank account, about the repairs her truck needed, about the rent that was due in 2 weeks. "No problem." "Good. And one more thing." He handed her a plain white card with a phone number written on it. "If anything happens, if you break down, if you have an accident, if anybody tries to stop you, you call this number, nobody else. Not the cops, not roadside assistance, not your dispatcher. Just this number, understand?" Rachel pocketed the card. "Yeah, I understand." She pulled out of the warehouse parking lot at 3:45 a.m. and headed south. She turned off her phone as instructed, though it felt wrong to drive without it. What if she had an emergency? But 3 times her normal rate was 3 times her normal rate, and strange jobs sometimes came with strange conditions. The first 3 hours were uneventful. She made good time through the darkness, passed through Socorro just after 5 a.m., and entered the Jornada del Muerto as the sky was beginning to lighten with the approaching dawn. The desert stretched out around her, empty and beautiful in the early light. At 6:15 a.m. she felt the first vibration. It came from the trailer, a low rhythmic pulse that she could feel through the cab. Rachel frowned and checked her mirrors, but everything looked normal. The container was secure, the trailer was tracking straight. Maybe the cargo had shifted slightly. It happened sometimes, even with secured loads. The vibration grew stronger. She could see her mirrors shaking now, and the can of soda in her cup holder was jumping and rattling. This wasn't normal cargo shifting. This was something else. She slowed to 50 miles per hour, then 45, trying to feel whether the trailer had a mechanical problem. Tire about to blow? Wheel bearing failing? But the vibration didn't change with her speed. It kept the same steady rhythm, like a heartbeat, like something in the trailer was alive and breathing. Rachel's practical mind rejected the thought immediately. Laboratory equipment, computers maybe, medical imaging machines, nothing alive, nothing that could cause this kind of vibration. Then she heard the sound. It came from the trailer, transmitted through the connecting frame to her cab. A high-pitched whine, rising and falling in pitch, almost musical, almost like singing. And underneath it, a deeper sound that she felt more than heard. Words maybe in a language she didn't recognize being chanted or recited. Her hands tightened on the wheel. This was wrong. This was very wrong. The cargo was making sounds, which meant it wasn't laboratory equipment, which meant the manifest was a lie, which meant she was hauling something she shouldn't be hauling. The white card in her pocket seemed to burn against her skin. "If anything happens," the man had said. Did this count? Was this an emergency? Or was it just normal for whatever was in that container? She decided to keep driving. Only 2 more hours to Alamogordo. She'd deliver the cargo, collect her payment, and never take another job from that warehouse again. The whining sound grew louder. The vibration intensified until her whole truck was shaking. And then, impossibly, the temperature in her cab began to drop. Her breath started misting in the air. The windows began to frost over, which was insane because it was July and the temperature outside was already climbing toward 90 degrees. Rachel turned her heater to maximum. It made no difference. The cold kept increasing. She could see ice forming on the inside of her windshield. Her fingers were going numb on the steering wheel. The singing sound changed. It became urgent, almost panicked. The vibration turned irregular, pulsing in sharp bursts, and Rachel heard something new, a banging sound, metal on metal coming from inside the container. Something was trying to get out. That was when she pulled over. She guided her truck onto the shoulder and stopped, her hands shaking from cold and fear. The banging continued, harder now. The singing had become a wail. Ice was spreading across every surface inside her cab. She fumbled the white card from her pocket with numb fingers and grabbed her phone, turning it on with difficulty. No signal, of course. Middle of the Jornada del Muerto, miles from the nearest cell tower. She stared at the phone number on the card, useless without a signal. The container behind her screamed. It was a human sound and not human at the same time. Voices, plural, shrieking in agony or rage or terror. The entire trailer was shaking now, rocking on its wheels. Rachel scrambled out of her cab and stumbled away from her truck, her breath coming in gasps, frost forming on her eyelashes. She watched in horror as the container began to glow. A sickly green light leaked from the seams around the doors, growing brighter. The metal of the container was warping, bulging outward as if something inside was pressing against it with tremendous force. Then the light went out. The screaming stopped. The vibration ceased. Her truck sat silently on the shoulder of the highway, looking completely normal in the early morning sun. The frost on her windows was already melting in the desert heat. Rachel stood there for 5 full minutes, not daring to approach her truck. Finally, she forced herself to walk back to the cab. The interior was warm again, as if nothing had happened. She touched the trailer and the metal was cool to the touch, completely normal. She sat in her cab and stared at her useless phone. Whatever was in that container, she didn't want to deliver it. She didn't want it on her truck. She didn't want to know what it was. But what were her options? Abandon the truck. Call the police when she got signal and tell them what? That she heard singing from a cargo container? That the temperature dropped and something screamed? They'd think she was crazy. She made a decision. She would drive to the nearest town. Carrizozo was about 40 miles ahead. Get a signal and call that number. Let whoever was on the other end of that line deal with their cargo. Rachel pulled back onto the highway and drove. The cargo stayed silent. The temperature stayed normal. 20 minutes later, she crested a rise and saw something that made her heart sink. A roadblock. 2 New Mexico State police cruisers parked across the highway, their light bars flashing. 2 officers standing in the road flagging her down. She had no choice. She slowed and stopped. One of the officers approached her window. "Morning, ma'am. License and registration, please." Rachel handed them over with trembling hands. "What's this about, officer?" "Routine safety check. We're inspecting commercial vehicles this morning." He looked at her paperwork. "You hauling cargo?" "Yes, sir. Laboratory equipment. Mind if we take a look?" Every instinct screamed at her to refuse, but she couldn't. If she refused, they'd get suspicious. They might search anyway. And what was she supposed to say? That her cargo was singing and screaming an hour ago? "Sure," she said. "But it's a sealed container. I don't have the key." The officer nodded. "That's fine. We just need to verify the seals match your manifest." Rachel climbed down and walked with the officers to the back of her trailer. The second officer was already there examining the container's lock. "Seals look good," he said. He knocked on the metal door. "Sounds empty, though." "It's laboratory equipment," Rachel said. "The manifest says 3,200 pounds. The first officer checked his tablet. "We don't have you on our list for inspection this morning. What's your point of origin?" "Albuquerque, private warehouse. Look, I'm already running late." "Won't take but a minute." He pulled out a portable device and pointed it at the container. "We're just going to scan for hazardous materials. Make sure everything's safe." He activated the device. It beeped once, twice. Then it started screaming. A high-pitched alarm that made all 3 of them jump. The officer stared at the readout. "What the hell?" "What is it?" Rachel asked. This doesn't make sense. The radiation signature is off the charts, and the temperature inside the container is..." He looked at her with suddenly hard eyes. "Ma'am, the interior temperature is reading -40 degrees Fahrenheit. Want to explain that?" Rachel backed away. "I don't know anything about it. I'm just the driver. They loaded a sealed container. I'm delivering it. That's all I know." The second officer was already on his radio. "Dispatch, we need hazmat response to our location. Highway 285 mile marker, 192. Then everything went wrong. The container began to glow again, that same sickly green light. The officers saw it and drew their weapons. "Step away from the vehicle," the first officer shouted. Rachel was already running. She sprinted away from her truck into the desert scrub as the singing sound started again. Behind her, she heard the officers shouting, their radios crackling, the light growing brighter. She looked back once and saw her entire trailer engulfed in green luminescence. Saw the container doors bulging outward. Saw shapes moving inside the light, humanoid but wrong, twisted, reaching. Then the light collapsed inward and vanished with a sound like thunder. Her truck, her trailer, the container, and both police cruisers were gone, just gone. In their place was a perfect circle of scorched asphalt 40 feet in diameter, and in the center of the circle, the 2 state police officers stood frozen, unharmed, but staring at nothing with empty eyes. Rachel called out to them, but they didn't respond. She approached cautiously. They were breathing, their eyes were open, but they were catatonic, completely unresponsive. She found one officer's radio and called for help. When the backup units arrived 20 minutes later, she told them everything. They didn't believe her. The two catatonic officers were taken to a hospital where they remained for 3 days before suddenly waking with no memory of the incident. The scorched circle on the highway was documented, photographed, and eventually attributed to a lightning strike. Rachel's truck and cargo were never found. She was investigated for insurance fraud, but there was no evidence she'd been involved in making them disappear. The shipping company denied any knowledge of the job. The warehouse in Albuquerque turned out to be abandoned with no records of recent use. The phone number on the white card was disconnected. Rachel doesn't drive anymore. She couldn't, even if she wanted to. Every time she gets near a truck, she hears that singing sound, feels that unnatural cold. She works in an office now, in a city surrounded by people and lights and noise. But sometimes at night she dreams of that container, of the shapes she saw moving in the green light, of the cargo that wasn't. And she wonders what would have happened if she'd delivered it to Alamogordo. What was waiting for it at that research facility? What were those things inside? The questions haunt her, but not as much as the certainty that whatever was in that container is still out there somewhere, still trying to get out, still singing its terrible song in the darkness. Michael Chen thought he knew every trick the desert could play on a tired driver's mind. Mirages that looked like water, shadows that seemed to move, stars that appeared to pulse and dance in the heat shimmer. He'd been driving commercial trucks through New Mexico for 12 years, and he'd learned to trust his instruments more than his eyes, his GPS more than his instincts. That knowledge didn't help him on a September night in 2024, when he discovered that some roads don't follow the rules of normal geography. Michael was hauling refrigerated goods from Alamogordo to Farmington, a long haul that would take him north through the mountains, across the desert, and into the northwestern corner of the state. He'd left Alamogordo at 7 p.m., planning to drive through the night and arrive in Farmington by 9 the next morning. His route took him north on Highway 54 toward Carrizozo, then west on Highway 380 to link up with Interstate 25. It was a lonely road, especially at night, but well-maintained and familiar. He'd driven it dozens of times. The trouble started just north of Oscura. Michael was about 90 minutes into his drive, making good time, when he noticed the hitchhiker. A man standing on the shoulder, thumb out, illuminated by Michael's headlights. The man was wearing jeans, a plaid shirt, and a baseball cap, standard clothes for rural New Mexico. Nothing unusual about him at all. Michael didn't stop. He never picked up hitchhikers. Too risky. Too many stories of drivers getting robbed or worse. He passed the man without slowing, caught a glimpse of a middle-aged face in his mirrors, and kept driving. 3 miles later, he saw the same hitchhiker again. Same man. Same plaid shirt. Same position on the shoulder, thumb out. Michael frowned and checked his odometer. No, he'd definitely traveled 3 miles. But there was the man looking identical to the hitchhiker he'd just passed. Must be a different guy, Michael muttered to himself. Someone else heading the same direction. But as he passed the second hitchhiker, he got a good look at the face. It was the same man, exactly the same. Down to the pattern on the shirt, the angle of the baseball cap, the neutral expression. Michael felt a chill run down his spine. He checked his GPS. The route showed him traveling north on Highway 54, right where he should be. His mile markers were clicking by normally. Nothing indicated anything was wrong. Another 3 miles. The hitchhiker appeared again. Now Michael was seriously unnerved. He slowed this time, staring as he passed. It was definitely, absolutely the same man. Same face, same clothes, same position, same gesture. Like someone had copy-pasted the same image onto the roadside every 3 miles. Michael grabbed his CB radio. "Breaker, breaker, anybody on 5-4 northbound, you seeing the hitchhiker, come back?" Static. He tried again. No response. He was alone on the highway. The fourth time he saw the hitchhiker, Michael stopped. He didn't know why. Maybe he wanted answers. Maybe he thought if he confronted this impossibility, it would resolve into something rational. He pulled onto the shoulder 50 yards past the man and waited. In his mirror, he watched the hitchhiker. The man didn't move, didn't turn to look at the stopped truck, just stood there with his thumb out facing down the highway. Michael climbed out of his cab. "Hey," he called. "You need help?" No response. The man stood motionless. Michael walked back toward him, his boots crunching on the gravel shoulder. As he got closer, he could see more details. The man's clothes weren't just similar to what he'd seen before. They were identical, down to a specific stain on the shirt collar. The man's face was blank, expressionless, and he wasn't breathing. Michael could see the man's chest, and it wasn't moving. "Sir?" Michael stopped 10 feet away. "Are you okay?" The man turned his head. The movement was smooth, too smooth, like a mannequin on a swivel. His eyes locked onto Michael's. They were gray, flat, empty. "Keep driving," the man said. His lips didn't move. The voice came from everywhere and nowhere. "Don't stop again. Don't turn around. Keep driving." Michael stumbled backward, terror flooding through him. He turned and ran to his truck, jumped in, and hit the accelerator hard. In his mirror, he saw the hitchhiker standing in the same position, watching him leave. 3 miles later, the hitchhiker appeared again. "No," Michael whispered. "No, this isn't possible." But there he was. Same man, same spot. Michael didn't stop. He kept driving, his hands white-knuckled on the wheel. The hitchhiker appeared every 3 miles like clockwork. After the 10th appearance, Michael wasn't just scared anymore, he was terrified. He watched his GPS obsessively. It showed him traveling north, making progress. The mile markers confirmed it. But something was wrong. He should have reached Carrizozo by now. He'd been driving for nearly 2 hours, which should have put him way past the town. Yet the road ahead was empty desert, no lights, no signs of civilization. Then he saw the billboard. It was an old sign, weathered and faded, advertising a long-closed roadside attraction. "Mystery Hill, 3 miles ahead, see the impossible." Michael had never seen that billboard before, and he'd driven this road dozens of times. But what really made his blood run cold was what someone had spray-painted across it in fresh red paint. "You are here." The next hitchhiker appeared right on schedule. Michael barely glanced at him. He was focused on the road, watching for any sign, any landmark, anything that might tell him where he really was. His GPS flickered. The blue line representing Highway 54 wavered, broke apart, reformed into a shape that made no sense. A circle. The route on his GPS had become a loop, and the icon representing his truck was traveling around and around it, never making forward progress, just cycling endlessly. "No," Michael said. "No, no, no, no." He grabbed his phone. No signal. He tried his CB again. Static. He was alone, trapped in some impossible geography that shouldn't exist. He thought about the hitchhiker's words, "Keep driving. Don't stop again. Don't turn around. Don't turn around." Michael looked at his fuel gauge. He had 3/4 of a tank, enough to drive for hours. What if he did turn around? What if he reversed direction, headed back the way he came? He made a decision. At the next wide spot, he executed a careful U-turn, bringing his truck around to face south. His GPS immediately went haywire, showing error messages and corrupted data. But Michael didn't care. He was driving south now, retracing his route. The hitchhiker appeared, but this time, he was facing south, thumb out in the opposite direction. And as Michael passed him, the man's head turned, tracking the truck, and Michael heard that voice again. Wrong choice. The road began to change. The pavement developed cracks, potholes. The white lines faded. The desert on either side seemed to press closer, the scrub brush and cacti growing right up to the road's edge. And ahead of him, in the beam of his headlights, Michael saw that the highway was narrowing. The lanes were shrinking. What had been a 2-lane highway was becoming 1.5 lanes, then 1 lane. The pavement edges were crumbling, falling away into darkness that looked deeper than it should. Michael slowed, afraid his trailer wheels would drop off the shrinking road. The hitchhiker appeared again, now standing in the middle of the narrowing road. Michael hit his brakes, stopping 50 feet away. The man raised one hand, palm out. "Stop." "Turn around," the voice said. "You cannot go back. The road only goes forward. Turn around." "Who are you?" Michael shouted. "What is this place?" "I am what you'll become if you don't turn around. I am what happens to drivers who stop, who question, who try to go back. I am the loop made manifest. Turn around, keep driving, or stay here with me forever." Michael looked past the hitchhiker. The road beyond him had deteriorated completely, just broken chunks of asphalt disappearing into absolute darkness. There was no going back. Whatever he'd entered, whatever had caught him, the only way through was forward. He executed another U-turn. The hitchhiker vanished. The road widened, the pavement smoothed. His GPS flickered and showed Highway 54 again, but still as a loop, still cycling endlessly. Michael drove. The hitchhiker appeared every 3 miles, always the same, always watching. Hours passed. His fuel gauge dropped to half, then a quarter. He passed the same billboard. "You are here," over and over. The same rock formations, the same mile markers. He was trapped in a 3-mile loop of highway that somehow existed separate from the real world, cycling endlessly through the same stretch of New Mexico desert. He thought about stopping, about giving up, but every time he slowed, he'd see the hitchhiker in the distance waiting. And he'd remember that empty gray gaze, that voice saying, "I am what you'll become." So he kept driving. He had no choice. His fuel gauge reached empty and still the engine ran. Impossible, but no more impossible than anything else. The night outside his windows never lightened. His clock showed the same time every time he looked at it. 3:33 a.m. Then when he'd lost count of how many times he'd completed the loop, something changed. The hitchhiker raised both hands this time. Not a stop gesture, a wave. Goodbye. The road opened up. The GPS showed Highway 54 as a straight line again, heading north. Lights appeared in the distance. Carrizozo. Michael accelerated toward them, not believing they were real until he actually entered the town. He pulled into the first gas station and sat in his cab with the engine idling, shaking. His clock showed 6:15 a.m. His fuel gauge showed 1/8 of a tank. He'd lost 10 hours. 10 hours that had felt like an eternity, driving the same 3 miles of highway over and over, trapped in a loop that shouldn't exist. Michael tried to tell other drivers what had happened. Most didn't believe him. A few, though, nodded with knowing looks and shared their own stories. The loop wasn't unique to Highway 54. It appeared on different roads at different times. Drivers would get caught in it, cycling the same stretch of highway endlessly until something, luck, prayer, sheer persistence, released them. The theories varied. Some thought it was a temporal anomaly, a fold in space-time that created closed loops. Others believed it was something intentional, something that fed on the fear and confusion of trapped travelers. The hitchhiker, he appeared in many of the stories. Always the same man, always warning, always watching. Michael never drove Highway 54 at night again. He routes around it even if it adds hours to his trips, because he knows the loop is still there, waiting. And he knows what the hitchhiker said was true. "I am what you'll become if you don't turn around. The road only goes forward, and some roads never end." Daniel Foster had hauled loads through every kind of weather and terrain the Southwest could throw at him. Sandstorms, flash floods, 120-degree heat, ice storms in the mountains. In 18 years of driving, he'd never had an accident, never missed a delivery, never quit a run because conditions got tough. His confidence came from preparation and experience. Daniel maintained his truck meticulously, planned his routes carefully, and listened to weather reports religiously. He trusted his equipment and his skills. The desert held no mysteries for him, just heat, distance, and the occasional mechanical challenge. That confidence died on a May night in 2023 when he hauled a load of construction materials from El Paso to Albuquerque and took a detour through White Sands. The detour wasn't Daniel's choice. Highway 70, his normal route northeast from Los de Guillemot Cruces, was closed due to a multi-vehicle accident. The Highway Patrol recommended an alternate route, Highway 54 north from Alamogordo, then cutting west to link up with Interstate 25. It would add 90 minutes to his trip, but it was better than waiting indefinitely for the highway to reopen. Daniel made the decision at 8 p.m. He'd take the detour, push through, and still make his morning delivery slot in Albuquerque. He fueled up in Alamogordo, grabbed coffee and a sandwich, and headed north on Highway 54. The route took him along the western edge of White Sands National Park. Daniel had seen the park during the day, the vast white gypsum dunes that stretched for miles, looking like snowdrifts in the middle of the desert, surreal and beautiful. But he'd never driven past it at night. At 9:45 p.m., he was running parallel to the park boundary. The landscape to his right was invisible in the darkness, but he could sense the presence of the dunes, vast pale shapes that seemed to glow faintly in the starlight. The moon was just a crescent, offering little illumination. That was when he started hearing the whispers. At first, Daniel thought it was his radio picking up crosstalk from another channel. Faint voices, too low to make out words, just barely audible under the country music playing from his speakers. He turned the volume down and the whispers remained unchanged. He turned the radio off completely. The whispers continued. They were coming from outside the truck. Daniel rolled down his window and immediately felt the temperature difference. The desert night was cooling, a pleasant 70 degrees, but the air coming from the direction of White Sands was cold. Winter cold. His breath misted, and the whispers were clearer now. Multiple voices speaking in languages he didn't recognize. Spanish, maybe. Native American languages. Other languages that sounded older, stranger. All of them whispering urgently, overlapping, creating a sound like wind through trees, except there were no trees out here. Daniel rolled up his window, unnerved. He'd heard about sound effects in the desert, how the wind could create strange noises, how acoustic phenomena could carry voices for miles. This must be something similar. Maybe there were people camping in the park, their voices carrying across the open landscape. But the explanation didn't feel right. The whispers had an urgency, an intensity that natural acoustic effects wouldn't produce. And they were keeping pace with his truck, staying at the same volume as he drove, as if they were tracking him. Then he saw the lights. Small points of blue-white light, dozens of them appearing in the darkness where the dunes should be. They floated and drifted like fireflies, though fireflies didn't live in the desert. As he watched, the lights began to move toward the highway, toward him. Daniel accelerated. His rational mind was screaming. Explanations, atmospheric effects, reflections, maybe vehicle lights from inside the park. But his instincts were screaming danger. The lights kept pace, gliding across the invisible dunes, and the whispers grew louder, resolving into something almost like words. Daniel caught fragments. Lost. Can't find. So cold. Help us. The lights reached the fence line that marked the park boundary. They didn't stop. They passed through the fence as if it weren't there and continued toward the highway. Daniel's speedometer climbed to 75, 80. The lights matched his speed effortlessly. Then he felt the cold inside his cab. The same winter cold from outside seeping through the sealed windows, through the metal and glass. His breath misted. Ice began forming on the inside of his windshield. "No," Daniel said through chattering teeth. "This isn't real. This isn't happening." The lights were alongside his truck now, keeping perfect pace. In their glow he could see shapes. Human shapes. Men, women, children, walking alongside his truck at 80 miles per hour, their feet not quite touching the ground. Their faces were desperate, pleading. Their mouths moved with the whispers. "Please, don't leave us. So lost. Can't find the way." Daniel saw details he wished he couldn't see. The people, the ghosts, because that's what they had to be, wore clothes from different eras: Spanish colonial dress, Victorian-era travel clothes, military uniforms from World War II, modern hiking gear, decades of travelers, maybe centuries, all lost in the white sands, all crying out for help. One of the figures, a woman in a long dress from the 1800s, reached toward his truck. Her hand passed through the metal of his door, and Daniel felt pressure on his arm. Icy cold, the touch of the dead. He screamed and jerked the wheel. His truck swerved, trailer fishtailing. He fought for control, got the rig straightened out, and pushed the accelerator to the floor. The truck's engine roared, 90 miles per hour, 95. The lights began to fall behind. The whispers faded. The cold receded. Daniel drove like hell was chasing him, which, in a sense, it was. He didn't slow until he was 20 miles past the park boundary, until the lights had vanished completely, until the whispers were gone and the temperature in his cab had returned to normal. He pulled over on the shoulder, killed the engine, and sat in the silence, his whole body shaking. The ice on his windshield had melted, leaving streaks of water. He looked at his arm where the ghost woman had touched him. There was a mark there. Not a bruise exactly, but a discoloration, pale and cold to the touch. Daniel researched white sands when he reached Albuquerque. What he found didn't comfort him. The park had a long history of deaths and disappearances. Hikers who wandered into the dunes and never came out. Travelers who got lost in the expanse of white and died of exposure. And in earlier centuries, Spanish explorers, settlers, and Native Americans who perished in the harsh landscape. The gypsum sands had a property that other deserts didn't. They stayed cool even in intense sunlight, but at night they became terribly cold. And they were disorienting. The white dunes all looked the same. People walked in circles, thinking they were heading towards safety until they collapsed from exhaustion or thirst. And once you died there, the sands took you, buried you, kept you. Daniel also found stories similar to his own. Nighttime drivers reporting lights in the dunes, whispers, cold spots, figures walking alongside their vehicles. Rangers at White Sands refused to comment on the record, but off-duty a few admitted they'd heard the whispers too. Some had seen the lights. No one liked to work in the park alone after dark. The mark on Daniel's arm faded over the next 3 weeks, but it left a scar, a pale handprint like a frostbite brand. He shows it to people sometimes when they ask about his stories from the road. Most don't believe him. That's fine. He doesn't need them to believe. He just needs them to understand that some places hold on to their dead, that some landscapes are so vast and empty that the lost souls can't find their way out, that they wander forever in the white sands, calling for help that never comes. Daniel avoids white sands now. Even during the day, he roots around it, because he knows the whispers are always there, just beyond the range of human hearing. The lights are always waiting, hidden by the sun, but ready to emerge when darkness falls. And the dead are always walking, searching, pleading for someone to show them the way home. He just prays they never find it. Because he suspects that if they do, if those lost souls ever discover the path back to the living world, they won't be content to simply walk alongside trucks on the highway. They'll want what they lost: life, warmth, a way out of the cold white desert that claimed them. And God help anyone who's on that highway when they decide to take it. Sarah Martinez had one rule about her trucking career: she didn't haul into Dulce. The small town in northwestern New Mexico, nestled in the mountains on the Jicarilla Apache Reservation, had a reputation among drivers. Strange things happened on Highway 64 approaching Dulce. Unexplained lights, vehicle malfunctions, lost time. The conspiracy theories about underground alien bases were nonsense, Sarah knew. But something about that area was wrong, and she'd learned to trust her instincts. So when her dispatcher assigned her a load to Dulce in October of 2024, she refused. "Send someone else," she told him. "Can't," he said. "The client specifically requested you. By name." That made Sarah pause. "Who's the client?" "Some research outfit. Didn't give a company. Name? Just a delivery address in Dulce and your name. They're paying double rate for overnight delivery." Sarah's instincts screamed no, but double rate was double rate, and her daughter's college tuition was due next month. Against her better judgment, she accepted the job. The pickup was in Santa Fe, a small, unmarked warehouse on the outskirts of town. The cargo was 3 identical metal cases, each about the size of a footlocker, with biometric locks. Total weight, 600 pounds. The manifest listed the contents as scientific instruments. The man who loaded the cases was military or ex-military. Sarah could tell from his bearing, his haircut, the way he moved. He didn't introduce himself. He just handed her a sealed envelope. "You open this when you're exactly 10 miles from Dulce," he said. "Not before, not after. Exactly 10 miles, understand? Why? Because those are the instructions. You want the job or not?" Sarah took the envelope. It was heavy, made of some kind of metallic feeling material. No writing on the outside. "What's in the cases?" she asked. The man's expression didn't change. "That's not your concern. You just deliver them to the address in the envelope. Hand them directly to whoever meets you there. Don't let them out of your sight until then. And if something happens? Nothing will happen if you follow the instructions exactly." He looked at her with flat, serious eyes. "But if you deviate from the protocol, if you open the cases, if you open the envelope too early or too late, if you discuss this job with anyone, then you're on your own. We will not help you. We will deny any knowledge of you or this delivery. Clear?" Sarah nodded, her mouth dry. This was way beyond her normal jobs, but she'd committed. She secured the cases in her trailer, climbed into her cab, and headed north. The drive from Santa Fe to Dulce normally took about 3 hours. Sarah's GPS showed 210 miles via Highway 84 to Chama, then Highway 64 east to Dulce. Mountain roads, some of them winding and steep, but she'd driven worse. The first 2 hours were normal. She climbed into the mountains, watching the landscape change from high desert to pine forest. Traffic was light. Her mind kept drifting to the cases in her trailer, to the envelope on her passenger seat. Scientific instruments. Right. Sarah had hauled actual scientific equipment before: universities, research labs, hospitals. It came with documentation, safety certifications, handling instructions. These cases had none of that, just biometric locks and an ominous warning. At the 2-hour mark, her GPS flickered. She was approaching the turnoff from Highway 84 to Highway 64, the final leg to Dulce. The screen showed her route clearly, but for just a moment something else appeared. a complex geometric pattern like a QR code that hurt to look at. Then it vanished, and the normal map returned. Sarah blinked, her head aching. Probably just a glitch. She made the turn onto Highway 64 and continued east. The road narrowed, climbing into rugged mountain terrain. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. Beautiful country. Empty country. Sarah passed through tiny towns, Navajo Dam, Arbalise, barely more than a few buildings each. And then she was in the reservation, heading toward Dulce. She checked her GPS. 23 miles to destination. The envelope instructions said to open it at exactly 10 miles out. Sarah watched the distance counter, her hand resting on the metallic envelope. At 15 miles, her radio began to pick up interference. Not the normal static of mountain terrain, but a rhythmic pulsing like a heartbeat made of sound. She turned the radio off. The pulsing continued, seeming to come from the air itself. At 12 miles, her headlights flickered. Once. Twice. Then they stabilized. Sarah gripped the wheel tighter. Something was happening. Something was building. At 10.1 miles, she pulled over and opened the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper with typed instructions. Dulce Protocol. Classified, proceed to coordinates 36.9345 again. 107.01 return to W arrive between 2200 and 2230 hours, 10 sonar p.m., 10:30 p.m. Flash headlights 3 times upon arrival. Wait for response signal, transfer cargo. Only to individual who provides correct response code. Broken arrow. 77 Delta. Confirm biometric identity match before releasing cargo. Depart immediately after transfer. Do not stop until you are 20 miles from Dulce. If anyone approaches who does not provide correct code, do not engage. Leave immediately and call emergency number. Redacted warning. Deviation from protocol may result in detention, cargo seizure, and/or termination of contract. You are under surveillance from this point forward. Sarah's hands shook as she read the instructions. This wasn't a normal delivery. This was something military, something classified. The coordinates weren't a street address. They were GPS coordinates for somewhere outside the town. And Broken Arrow. Wasn't that military code for a nuclear incident? She checked her clock. 9:40 p.m. She could still make the delivery window. But every instinct told her to turn around, to dump the cargo, to get the hell out of these mountains. The double payment. Her daughter's tuition. Sarah put the truck in gear and continued toward Dulce. The pulsing sound grew louder as she drove. She could feel it now, vibrating through the truck's frame. And the sky was doing something strange. Faint lights danced on the horizon, colored bands like Aurora Borealis, but wrong somehow. Flickering too fast, moving in patterns that hurt to track. She entered the coordinates into her GPS. They led to a location 5 miles north of Dulce, up a mountain road. Sarah turned off Highway 64 onto a dirt road that wasn't on any map, following the GPS directions. The road climbed steeply through dense forest. No lights, no signs of civilization, just the dirt track winding up into the mountains. And the pulsing sound was almost deafening now, making her teeth ache. At coordinates 36.9345 to Grand N 107.0122 to W, the road ended in a small clearing. Sarah's clock showed 10:15 p.m., right in the delivery window. She flashed her headlights 3 times as instructed and waited. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then from the tree line on the far side of the clearing, a light flashed. 3 times. The response signal. Sarah watched as a figure emerged from the trees, human-shaped, wearing what looked like a hazmat suit or protective gear. The figure approached slowly, deliberately, stopping 20 feet from her truck. Sarah rolled down her window. "I have a delivery," she called out. The figure raised one hand. A voice came from a speaker, mechanically distorted. "Response code," Sarah checked her instructions. Broken Arrow 77 Delta. The figure lowered its hand. Confirmed. Open your trailer. Do not exit your vehicle. Sarah released the trailer lock from her cab controls. She watched in her mirrors as two more figures appeared from the trees, moving to the back of her trailer. They worked quickly, efficiently, removing the 3 cases. One of the figures approached her window carrying a biometric scanner. Your thumbprint, please. Sarah pressed her thumb to the scanner. It beeped. Transfer confirmed, the distorted voice said. You may depart. Follow the protocol. Do not stop for 20 miles. The figures vanished back into the trees carrying the cases. Sarah was alone in the clearing. She didn't wait. She turned her truck around and drove down the mountain as fast as she dared on the narrow dirt road. Behind her, the sky lit up. Not lightning, not aurora. Something else, a column of green-white light that shot straight up from where the clearing had been, piercing the clouds. The pulsing sound became a wail, then cut off abruptly. Sarah's truck died. Engine, lights, everything. She coasted to a stop on the dark mountain road, her heart hammering. Through her windshield, she watched the column of light pulse once, twice, then collapse in on itself with a sound like reality tearing. Her truck started again. Just like that. Lights, engine, all systems normal. Sarah didn't hesitate. She floored it, driving down that mountain road like demons were chasing her. She didn't stop until she was 30 miles from Dulce, well past the 20-mile limit. She pulled into a gas station in Chama and sat in her cab, shaking. Her phone had 7 missed calls, all from the same blocked number. As she stared at it, the phone rang again. She answered. Hello? Ms. Martinez. The voice was calm, professional. Thank you for completing the Dulce protocol. Payment has been transferred to your account. We require your confirmation that you will maintain silence regarding this delivery. Yes, I won't say anything. Good. You performed admirably. We may contact you for future deliveries. No, Sarah said, I don't want any more jobs like this. A pause. That is your choice. But be advised that discussing tonight's events with anyone, family, friends, authorities, media, would be a violation of your contract and would result in serious consequences. Do you understand? Yes. Excellent. Have a safe drive home, Ms. Martinez. The call ended. Sarah checked her bank account. The payment was there. Double her normal rate, plus a bonus that made her eyes widen. Enough to cover her daughter's tuition and then some. She deleted the call from her phone's history. She destroyed the envelope and instructions. She drove home and tried to forget about the cases, the clearing, the column of light. But she couldn't forget. And a month later, she started researching. She found the conspiracy theories about Dulce, the alleged underground base, the stories of genetic experiments, the reports of military activity in the mountains. Most of it was obvious nonsense, but buried in the noise, she found reports from other drivers. Deliveries to coordinates outside Dulce. Strange protocols, cases with biometric locks, lights in the sky, and warnings to never speak about what they'd seen. Sarah also found obituaries. 3 drivers who'd made similar deliveries had died in the past 5 years. Accidents, officially. But the timing was suspicious, all within 6 months of their Dulce runs. She stopped researching. She stopped asking questions. And when the blocked number called again 2 months later with another high-paying job to Dulce, she declined. She declined the next call too, and the one after that. Eventually, the calls stopped. Sarah doesn't drive at night anymore if she can help it. She avoids jobs in northern New Mexico entirely, because she knows the truth now. Something is happening in the mountains outside Dulce. Something that requires special cargo delivered under strict protocol, something that creates columns of light that tear holes in the sky. And whatever it is, it's still there, still operating, still requiring deliveries from drivers who are desperate enough or brave enough or foolish enough to follow the Dulce protocol. Sarah wasn't foolish. She got out while she could. She just wonders how many others did the same, and how many are still making those nighttime runs into the mountains delivering cases they'll never understand to people who aren't quite people, for purposes that humanity was never meant to know. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed these stories, like the video, subscribe, and stay tuned for more terrifying tales coming soon.